Chapter 127. Shizun, careful, the ground is slippery. But Chu Wanning didn't ask, and Chu Changyong didn't raise it. In fact, the sect leader of Xisheng Peak was on his way to getting rather plastered, light-headed and slurring his words. He leaned over, stared at Chu Wanning, and said, "You Hang, you're upset." "I'm not." "You're mad." "I'm not." Chu Wanning repeated, "Who upset you?" Chu Wanning fell silent. Should he ask? He'd feel a lot better if he just asked. Maybe Moran didn't actually say he'd definitely be back tonight. Maybe he only said he'd try his best, and Chu Changyong reported it wrong, or remembered it wrong. Chu Wanning glanced toward the door, at the black night outside. The banquet was coming to a close, and the seats would soon be cold. His first day out of seclusion, and Moran hadn't made it back in time. Every single disciple of Xisheng Peak was here, including those whose names he didn't know, and those he'd never even met. It was only him who was missing. But without him present, the banquet was incomplete, and all the stewed crab meatballs, sweet osmanthus lotus root, and fragrant pear blossom white wine in the world wouldn't make it complete. Chu Wanning closed his eyes. There came a sudden ruckus from the direction of Mengpo Hall's front entrance, and a bunch of disciples yelled excitedly in the distance. "Yeah, look, what's that outside? There's something in the sky." The commotion drew more and more people. Now, even those in the hall could hear the lively crackling and thunderous booms from outside, one after another. They walked out to the verdant lawn outside Mengpo Hall, looking up at the sky lit by fireworks, a million glittering specks blooming and scattering against the backdrop of the starry night. Fireworks! The younger disciples beamed. Their youthful faces were illuminated by the flickering lights above, the sky full of stars reflected in their eyes. "It's so pretty. I've never seen fireworks this big, not even at New Year's." Chu Wanning slowly walked out from the hall as well. His mood was gloomy, grateful as he was that Chu Changyong had gone to the trouble of preparing such a brilliant fireworks show. The heaviness in his chest weighed on him. A sharp whistling sound pierced the night. He lifted his head listlessly and saw a streak of golden red light shooting into the open sky like an arrow loosed from its bow. How beautiful! If only that person were here too. Bang! That brilliant flare flew level with the Big Dipper's handle before bursting across the sky in countless glittering sparkles, eclipsing the stars of the Milky Way and stealing the light from the moon itself. The fireworks scattered like so many high-tongue petals set adrift by a rustling breeze, floating and dancing like wintry snow, glimmering and rippling like open water. Amidst the splendid display and lively bustle of the crowd, Chu Wanning slowly closed his eyes. "Disciple Moran welcomes Shizun back from seclusion." These words came from behind him all of a sudden, every syllable clear and needle-like. Chu Wanning began to tremble minutely. He felt as if there were thorns in his back, fire in his throat. Unable to breathe, with his heart beating out of rhythm and blood racing through his veins, he whipped his head around. Standing behind him were a handful of disciples who had just emerged from Mengpo Hall. All were gazing at the sky in amazement, and one of them had been reading aloud. And then it wasn't just one person reading these words anymore. Everyone found it novel and interesting. Everyone, down to the youngest disciple, the men and the women, those standing alone and those in groups. All of them were looking up at the glittering, resplendent night sky and reading out loud. Disciple Moran welcomes Shizun back from seclusion. The utterances carried a tenderness like the tide, gentle as slumberous whispers. The words bespoke determination like a boulder, firm as the mighty mountains. Chu Wanning's head snapped skyward, where the brilliant fireworks, guided by spiritual energy, had spelled out one sentence in huge, shimmering letters across the night sky. The fireworks formed a magnificent river that could doubtless be seen for hundreds of miles. In that moment, in that night, Chu Wanning felt as if the vivid, glittering specks were converging on him from across hills and mountains, across the breadth of time, bringing with them that one person's joys and sorrows, longings and regrets. He suddenly felt like a piece of driftwood afloat in the ocean, and the ocean was Moran's eyes. The way they had looked when he pulled Chu Wanning into his arms before the Ghost King's palace in the underworld, full of tender warmth, fiery passion, and unwavering determination. There was nowhere to run. He was surrounded by that person's murmurs, that person's laughter, that person's affection. Chu Wanning didn't want to consider what kind of affection it was, that of a master and disciple, or something more. Just having it was enough. Moran didn't manage to make it back before the end of the banquet. It was simply too far away, even traveling through the night without stopping. But he still had in his bag the signal fireworks made by the Chuanji elder that he'd been given for emergencies should he meet with some mishap while off the peak. It was an ingenious creation. By writing a message on paper with spiritual energy, placing it in the tube, and setting off the firework, one could project a message across the sky in bold letters, so large they would be visible from Xisheng Peak, no matter how far the sender. The signal fireworks were costly and exceedingly difficult to construct, but Moran didn't care about that. He only wanted to ensure his Shizun wouldn't be upset. Even across mountains and rivers, even separated by time and circumstance, he had to make sure Chu Wanning could hear these words. Disciple Moran welcomes Shizun back from seclusion. The banquet came to a close 4 hours later. By the time Chu Wanning got back to the Red Lotus Pavilion, the night was late and he smelled of wine. He wanted to take a bath to wash off, but the weather had gotten cool of late, and the water in the pavilion's lotus pond was too chilly for bathing. He'd nearly caught a cold washing there yesterday. After a moment's thought, he stepped inside to fetch a change of clothes and a wooden washtub, then headed toward Melodic Springs. Melodic Springs was the sect's communal bath, though he'd only ever used it in his first few months at Xisheng Peak. Hardly anyone would be bathing this late at night. Lifting the thin hemp curtain with one hand, Chu Wanning strode in. Many parts of Xisheng Peak had been renovated over the years, but Melodic Springs was unchanged. High, black-tiled walls rose on all sides, and lightly drifting sheer veils lined the winding corridor that led from the front gate to a flight of 6 narrow wooden steps, lacquered in a clear varnish. Bathers would remove their shoes and socks before descending the stairs, so at one glance anyone could tell how many people were currently soaking in the baths. While taking off his own, Chu Wanning saw that there was only one other pair of boots here, fairly large and a little dirty, but placed neatly in the corner rather than carelessly tossed to the ground just because it was empty. Chu Wanning wondered who else had come here to bathe this late at night, but it was only a fleeting thought. Holding his small washtub, he walked barefoot down the steps, brushed aside the last set of curtains at the end of the path, and walked into the courtyard. The courtyard was hazy with steam, which rose from the massive hot spring that cascaded down from a broad, rumbling waterfall and spilled over the rocks into tiered pools. The thick, cloudy steam gently unfurled out from the pool, drifting slowly, filling every corner and crevice and killing visibility. A person had to get very close to another to see their face. Chu Wanning followed the little footpath of smooth, colorful pebbles under the luxuriant canopy of flowering peach blossoms until he reached the closest entrance to the baths. A low shelf carved from blue stone had been placed there to hold bathers' clothes. He put his wooden washtub and robe on the shelf, then undressed and waded slowly into the spring. It was pleasantly warm. Chu Wanning couldn't help the soft sigh of contentment that escaped him. If not for his reluctance to brave the crowds who bathed here, or otherwise only come this late every day, he'd really rather bathe here than the cold waters of the Red Lotus Pavilion's simple pond. Truly, Chu Chengyong was fastidious and thorough. He had personally overseen the construction of melodic springs. Flowers bloomed along the borders of the pool year-round, and there was a waterfall at the end of the pond for rinsing. There was even a small wooden pavilion at the hot spring's side to lie down and rest in after soaking, furnished with heated stones meant to be placed along the meridians to relieve pressure. This was vastly more indulgent than the rushed bath he'd had to make do with yesterday at the Red Lotus Pavilion. In his delight, and seeing that there was no one else around, Chu Wanning let loose for a moment, extending his slender limbs and swimming all the way to the waterfall with a splash. He had only just risen from the water and wiped his face, a faint smile still hovering on his lips, when he suddenly noticed a man very close to him, showering in the surging waterfall with his back turned. The waterfall was so loud that Chu Wanning hadn't heard the other person at all, even this close by. If he had come out of the water a little later, swum a little further, the tips of his fingers probably would have brushed the man's legs. Good thing he stood up when he did and hadn't accidentally touched the stranger. But he was still inappropriately close, practically standing right behind the other man. This person was very tall, quite a bit taller than Chu Wanning, and his sun-kissed skin was the color of honey, making him seem wild and unrestrained. His shoulders were strong and broad, and the shoulder blades that flexed beneath his golden skin hinted at a concealed strength with each lift of his arms. He wasn't overly muscular, but sculpted and evenly toned. The water cascaded over his body, rivulets gathering into streams to flow down the wide expanse of his powerful masculine back. Some of the spring water splashed off, but more seemed infatuated with his body, clinging to him in a light sheen, loath to part. As someone accustomed to asceticism, Chu Wanning had never seen such a carnal sight. His ears burned as he hastily turned to leave. Heaven only knew whether it was the bottom of the spring that was too slippery, or if it was Chu Wanning who took a false step. He stumbled and fell face first into the pool, sending a spray of water into the air. Chu Wanning's face was red with embarrassment, and he inadvertently swallowed a mouthful of water in his fluster. When he remembered that it was technically bath water from that guy behind him, he became so indignant and disgusted that he discarded all appearance of calm and composure, scrambling and flailing as he tried to find his footing. He was the Yuheng elder. How could? In his panic, and with no dignity left to speak of, a strong, shapely hand grabbed him and pulled him up from the streaming water. The man had obviously been startled by what had happened just behind him. "Are you okay?" The man spoke in a deep, soothing voice, one hand around Chu Wanning's arm. The difference in their heights was such that his breath puffed against Chu Wanning's ear as he lowered his head to speak. "Careful, it's slippery here." Chu Wanning's ears burned even hotter. He could sense that man's chest behind him, mere inches from his back, rising and falling, up and down. Each time it fell, a merciful relief like it had spared his life. Each time it rose, a menacing precarity as it threatened to brush against his back. Chu Wanning was both indignant and mortified at once. Never had he been touched by someone like this. He shook off the man's hand, expression surly and eyes aimed determinedly away from the stranger. "I'm fine." The deafening rush of the waterfall all but masked Chu Wanning's voice, but for some reason the man jolted at the sound, falling entirely still before slowly lifting his hand like he wanted to say something, but didn't quite have the courage. In that brief moment of hesitation, Chu Wanning had already opened a wide gap between them and stepped into, or rather hid inside, the rushing, roaring curtain of water.